Hello team, welcome to another ATPGEO politics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update, the first part thereof for what I think is the 27th of May 2025. I am in a hotel room in somewhere else, Patagonia or Pakistan, I'm not quite sure. And I don't have all my usual sources to hand, so this will be a bit all over the place. Hopefully it still be of interest and use to you. We'll start with the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, and you can find them linked in the description below. We have a number of personnel lost that's now below 1,000 again. We've seen this a couple of times in recent in the last week, really, which is, I think, indicative of the Russians not pushing it as much as they were, possibly getting ready for a large offensive. There are some talking about an offensive coming from the north, some talking about an offensive coming from the south, some talking about an offensive coming from the east. Who knows? Could be anywhere. 990 personnel lost. So almost 1,000. Two tanks and one troop carrying AFV. So that's not very high at all in those categories. And likewise, 17 artillery systems. Is the first day for a long time we've seen that category below the daily average. So I don't know what that says. And also a very low number, comparatively speaking, is in the vehicles and fuel tanks category. 64 pieces lost there. So a relatively low day of Russian losses, and actually the same can be said for, thankfully, after 3 nights of horrendous aerial activity, a night of much less aerial activity. 60 drones were sent in, no missiles last night. There's been this talk that Russia may have stockpiled 500 ballistic missiles, and that may well be true. My mantra is always, you would if you could, you aren't so you can't. Why wouldn't they be using them now? Why wouldn't they have used them last night and the night, not last night, the night before and the night before and the night before that, alongside those massive drone swarms? They did use some ballistic missiles, but why limit it? Why not just completely overwhelm the Ukrainians while you could? So I'm always suspicious of the idea of holding that many back. If you're holding that many back, I don't know, what are you waiting for? Even more stockpiled? But then you need the launchers to be able to use them. So yeah, I'm not 100% sure. I'm not completely sold. But then that, what do I know? Okay, 60 drones were sent in. 35 of them were taken out conventionally, 8 of them by electronic warfare means. So that's 43 out of 60, leaving 17 to get through. And actually, that's quite a high proportion of the 60. That is over a quarter, right? So that's not good for the Ukrainians. But then there were far fewer drones sent last night. I don't know what was targeted. There's not a lot of battle damage assessment coming out in terms of hits on Ukraine. Now, the Ukrainians sent, I don't know how many drones into Russia. There was a rumor last night that there were 400 in the air. I mean, that's massive. But I haven't really heard anything since. There were air raid warnings and whatnot. There were claims that in all of these different regions there were vast numbers of drones. All I know this morning is the Murom plant. So you might have heard me say in the past, Murom sort of video surveillance units have been blown up. They're quite small camera units, as far as I remember. Well, I presume they come from the Murom instrument making plant in Russia's Vladimir region that was hit. Outcome of the attack, though, remains unconfirmed and damage yet to be determined. So that was definitely a site. We know that there's a Atesh of the partisan group have reported successfully disabling a relay cabinet on a railway track in the Tula region. But other than that, I'm a little nonplussed as to what exactly has happened overnight in both countries, really, in terms of what has been struck. Now, I am going to share some other information with you, which I think could be useful for you guys to know. Just hearing, Yeah, that the carpet plan was implemented at airports. So the carpet plan is where they shut down all the airports because of drone activity. That was implemented. Max 25 said an hour ago at the airports in Ivanovo, Kaluga, Nizhny Novgorod, Tambov, Yaroslavl, and Saratov. Russians claim to have shot down 99 drones in 7 regions. So that's far fewer drones than were rumored to be sent in last night. But I'm not sure. It appears that the Ukrainians were active, at least, with drones going into Russia last night. Okay. Now, a few things that are worth noting. Yesterday, Friedrich Merz came out and said that there were no restrictions on any Western weapons, whether that be actually American or German, French, British. This was taken on and reported quite widely. He's come out and said this was actually referring to a decision that was made ages ago. And in fact, I did report on similar some time ago, so it might be just a regurgitation of what was already known. But it is significant that there are no restrictions. But I think, like I said before, it's not the restrictions that are the worry. It's the sheer number of missiles and weapons that the Ukrainians have. So, decision on lifting range restrictions on arms for Ukraine was made months ago, said Merz in a clarification. Quote, in this respect, yesterday in Berlin, I described something that has been happening for months, namely that Ukraine has the right to use weapons it receives, even beyond its own borders, against military targets on Russian territory. Anyway, good to know that that is the case. And then we have at least 206 prisoners of war have apparently died in Russian captivity since the war began, with autopsies revealing torture, medical neglect, and brutal conditions. Evidence points to systematic or systemic abuse aimed at covering up war crimes, according to Associated Press, as stated by Null Reports there. Just a little bit on military aid. I will do a video on military aid probably when I get back tonight. But the MOD of Ukraine, the Ministry for Strategic Industries, and the UK MOD have signed a project agreement on the use of excess profits from frozen Russian assets within the framework of the ERA initiative. Ukraine will receive $3 billion in 2025 to 2026. Funds will be used for procurement of foreign-made defence products. So that could be buying stuff from the US, or it could be stipulated to be buying stuff from the UK, I guess. Repair and maintenance of military equipment and implementation of joint projects. And one of the other things I wanted to just quickly talk about was Trump is apparently rumoured to be considering sanctions. Finally, again, I say finally, again, I mean, let's face it, he probably won't at all. He keeps being rumoured to be thinking about this every time Putin comes up with a blank in terms of negotiations and ceasefires. He's evidently angry with Putin for not being the person he thought he was, or some ridiculous sentiment like that, considering the Russians are brutally hitting Ukraine every night, and certainly were for those 3 previous nights, with massive barrages of weaponry. And that's causing all sorts of havoc. Well, maybe he's going to put sanctions on, but, really that should have been done already. And the worst news is this. Well, there are 2 things. First of all, the G7 are going to consider lowering the barrel price of oil. However, that is something the EU have tried to do, and without success, I believe, because of the US. So the G7 appear to be taking that on, or with the EU. So No Report says, quoting from or sourcing the Financial Times, the European Commission aims to lower the Russian oil price cap from $60 a barrel. I believe they're looking at something like 45 maybe, as part of its 18th sanctions package, but needs US support to proceed. The proposal will be discussed at the G7 finance. So that's the idea, is that the EU, I presume, can't do that unilaterally or have not the effect that's desired, and so they need the US on board, and that's going to be up to the G7 to convince the US. A proposal will be discussed at the G7 finance meeting in Canada, which I presume, is that imminent? Is it ongoing? What else? There was, so they're looking at sanctions on on the US. On Russia. Everyone's looking at sanctions on Russia, of course, all the time, and this idea that Trump is potentially thinking about them now. I have for a long time said that since Trump was inaugurated on January the 20th, that the US, I predicted then think they probably are doing this. So both a prediction and a speculation of the real state of affairs, that the US are pulling back from sanctions enforcement. And that's really important because actually the US has got a decent set of sanctions on. Biden whacked a load on just before he left office. And I think that the Trump administration don't give a rat's arse about Ukraine. And so it's not so much that they are lifting the sanctions, it's that they're not enforcing the ones that are in place, which is functionally the same. Well, we hear today that the US and the EU are no longer coordinating efforts to counter Russia's sanctions evasion, according to the internal German Foreign Ministry report. Now, that's not a case that the EU aren't doing it, it's that the US aren't coordinating with the EU about sanctions implementation. Transatlantic cooperation has collapsed, G7 momentum has gone, and 80% of circumvention cases are linked to China through Hong Kong, or China and Hong Kong, actually. So both. So that is an absolute shocker, because that is insanely important for pressure to be maintained on Russia, and it just indicates that the US are not interested in maintaining pressure on Russia. So yeah, as Kiev Independent says, US EU no longer coordinating enforcement of Russia sanctions, according to various media. EU sanctions chief David O'Sullivan noted that there is, quote, no more outreach between the two sides on sanctions evasion, according to an internal report from an EU ministerial meeting, Süddeutsche Zeitung reported. That is an absolute shocker, I think. So, Trump can weigh in on new sanctions all he likes, but do you know what he needs to do? He needs to implement or properly enforce the sanctions that are already in place. Really frustrating. And finally, Russia has convened a UN Security Council meeting. I mean, this takes the piss, doesn't it? Claiming that Europe is obstructing peace in Ukraine. Really? I'll tell you who's obstructing peace in Ukraine. The freaking invading army and Putin, the gargantuan numbnut. Deputy Envoy Dmitry Polyansky accused European actions of hindering a settlement as Russia continues large-scale strikes on Ukrainian cities. I mean, what an insult to rationality and to those who have died in Ukraine. So I think that's pretty much wrapped it up for me today. Just the final one that's come in, actually, Max25 going back to the Shahid strikes that are taking place, and we know this, I've reported this, but this is coming from Yuri Ihnat, the spokesperson for the Ukrainian Air Force. The Russians have changed the tactics of their drone attacks. The occupiers launched drones at an altitude of more than 2 kilometers, difficult to shoot them down. Drone strikes are often carried out in groups on one object, and also up to 40% of drones are false to overload air defense. Fascinating that 40% of them are false. Wow. So when a lot of drones do get through, this is what I wonder, whether the drones that get through, that 40% can be a percentage of those that get through. So, for example, 17 today, 40% were unarmed. Or do they include the unarmed in the electronic warfare and decoy part section? And so therefore, all 17 that got through were counted as being armed. So yeah, I would like definite clarity on that. I mean, Khmelnytsky was hit 2 nights ago really heavily, and I think they sent 6 ballistic missiles there at once, and that just properly will overwhelm the air defences and cause an absolute nightmare for, no doubt, the Staro-Konstantinov air base that's located in Khmelnytsky. Anyway, that's enough from me. You guys take care. I'll be back probably with a video later tonight, depending on whether my whether I get the green card for that, or whether I have my guts for garters strung up around the house. But But yeah, look out for that. Thank you for checking out this video and my previous ones, and thank you very much to Benny Pie, who's been putting them together. And my goodness, it is taking him a long time, so I cannot thank him enough for that dedication. Take care, y'all. Speak soon. Toodle pips.